You know, I was not aware how many people actually played this deck, but I'm ready to showcase to you guys my updated take on Shieldfisher Dragon for set 12 of the current meta of Cardfight Vanguard OverDress. What is up, card fighters, and welcome back to the Prime Vanguard channel. So I was off camera my last 3 deck profiles because I was not feeling well. Hair was like, not in the right spot. I just was not me at all. Don't get me wrong, Shieldfisher, you're not winning a BCS with any time, but at least this time you're actually playing a fair game with the deck because its early game is so solid that the late game is actually where you struggle a little bit. But every relationship is a give and take, so with that being said, let me just show you what I'm talking about. We head over to camera 2 and get this deck profile started. Alright, you guys, to get this deck profile started off with, I am still playing the Zorga ride line for Shieldfisher Dragon. Moving on to the main deck, I am playing 3 copies of Shieldfisher Dragon. Now, there's honestly not much to say here. Big body Vanguard that you stay on, you get to stall out the game, try out different strategies, and just beat your opponent really hard with the heavy hitting Vanguard. The additional 18,000 power on top of defensive triggers actually is still really hard for decks to get past prior to Persona riding turns, because a lot of decks still are making around that number. So dropping like 15k, 10k shields, 5k shields, it's still annoying for your opponent to deal with, and they have to commit their attacks onto your rear guards, which you don't really care about in this deck because a lot of them have on-place effects or abilities that you already use later in the game when you can revive them back, so you never feel bad about them swinging to your rear guards, nor does it feel like a loss because they can't break past your Vanguard. Now for the new additions. So in this variation of Shieldfisher, I'm playing 2 copies of Clapping Dragon. Now I threw Clapping Dragon in the deck because I realized that in my prior Shieldfisher deck profile, when I was using the Blitz orders to play, a lot of card advantage came from the Grade 2 and you weren't really building up a huge hand. So Clapping Dragon fixes one of the key issues of the deck, is the fact that it builds up hand, gives you a nice body on board, as well as the fact that this card becomes a really good beat stick on your turns when you're on Shieldfisher that are non-Persona ride. A lot of our rear guards don't apply any really big pressure outside of like making numbers with triggers and like rushing your opponent. So having certain cards like help you filter out your deck for pieces as well as become a big body becomes fantastic during the later game battle phases, especially when you go into the long game with this deck, which is pretty much the strategy for Shieldfisher. And for my next grade 3, I'm playing 1 copy of Hydro Rail Dragon. Now this is an interesting personal tech choice. I mean, all of Shieldfisher is just interesting choices, but the reason why I'm playing 1 copy of this is because I felt like in this deck, there's no pressure behind any of your attacks. Your units swing for high numbers and that's it. So I've been experimenting with playing cards that have like on-hit effects, which Stoicheia doesn't really have a lot of good on-hit effects for. I'm experimenting with one of this right now. It may go up or down, but if it hits your opponent, this retires itself and lets you get a grade 3 back from your drop zone. So essentially, if this card hits, you're going to be able to recycle your Persona ride, or your Clapping Dragon is another piece that your opponent will have to deal with throughout the game. I think that having units like these that like have some sort of pressure behind them if they hit or not means that your opponent will actually have to commit more cards in their hand to stop your attacks instead of just being no crit, no Gardo all the time. Because now the benefit off of this is just actually forcing your opponent to stop. So the ratio of this is interchangeable. It might go up, might go down. Not sure yet, but you guys will be the first to know. And moving on to my grade 2s, for some more new additions, I am playing 3 copies of Spurring Maiden Alenia. Now Alenia is an OG card. This card is, I think, like set 1, but its effect is actually solid. So she calls herself out from hand and then lets you counterblast 1, soul blast 1, call a grade 2 or less from your drop zone to rearguard circle, and it gets 5,000 power. Now, like I said earlier, a lot of these units in the deck don't generate a lot of power, but with their own effects, if any at all, outside of like Clapping Dragon and a few other cards. And therefore, Alenia being able to make other bodies onto the board, as well as being another card for Superior Calling to open up Shieldfisher Dragon for attacks, means that we have a card in the early game, unlike Diantha, my baby. This card lets you like start rushing in the early game, hitting your opponent harder. So when you finally go into Shieldfisher Dragon, they're hopefully at like 3-4 damage, and this way the pushing with Shieldfisher and the numbers you have from your other rear guards actually matters. For my next grade 2, I play 3 copies of Proud Pollen Raphilius. Now this card is a plant token generator. I've discussed how much I love this card on Claudine, and in this deck it works out extremely well as well. Because we're focusing around one of the newer orders for the deck, as well as a bunch of new support cards for this deck as well, being able to drop this card, get you more plant tokens onto the board, and just start rushing your opponent right away is fantastic. It also sets up for some of our other cards and gives us the flexibility to test cards in Stoicheia that focus on retiring units, because this card essentially is 3 bodies onto the board right away. Now moving on to grade 1s, I am playing 2 copies of my newest favorite card, which is Unwavering Maiden Yolanda. Now, Yolanda's effect is actually pretty cool. So she has the ability of auto rearguard circle. When she boosts, you retire 2 other grade 1 or less rear guards, you draw a card, and she becomes an 18k booster until the end of that battle. Now, Yolanda is one of the cards that benefits off all the plant tokens you're going to have in the early game as well as the late game. Being able to convert them into power as well as draw means that you're able to now make space for other cards in your deck to focus on plant token generation as well as power cards. And because she works at any period in the game, you could start swinging at your opponent with over 38,000 power numbers like really early. Because if you apply triggers onto your plant tokens, assuming you haven't applied any other card effects, you're swinging for about 33,000. Trigger effects might pump you up to like 38,000. She's just a really solid booster and converts your bad cards into really good card advantage. Next up, I play 2 copies of Dragon Tree Wretch, Bist Ivis. Now, the first effect is irrelevant because we're not Dragon Tree, so we'll just skip past that, but it's for the second skill. Now, this card lets us use our Counterblast and Soul Blast to acquire an order back from our drop zone to our hand. In this deck, unlike Claudine, I do play a variety of 2 specific grade 1 orders that do come up, and I'm still experimenting with other orders, so being able to make sure that we can find either or of the orders that we actually need is important, because sometimes we might want to power up and sometimes we don't want to search the deck. This card's just a really good resource piece, and when you finally get done using it, you can just convert it into draw power for Yolanda, or, you know, hold on, or call it back later in the game when you actually need its effect. For my next grade 1, 4 copies of Boro Mushrooms. We all know this guy, it's in like almost all of my Stoicheia decks now. 2 bodies on board, soul charge, oh my goodness, like honestly broken. 4 Stoicheia PGs. Alright, and now for my triggers. So I've changed up Shieldfisher entirely. We are now playing Rainbow with 4 copies of Frenzied Eris, 4 copies of Tier Knight Kostas, 3 copies of Serene Maiden Lena, 1 copy of Stoicheia OT, and 4 copies of Battle Siren Dorcia. Now, I started playing Rainbow and Shieldfisher because I feel like Rainbow is one of the main ways to go with this deck. Shieldfisher itself, as we all know, does not do anything, so being able to have a variety of different outs for different situations has actually been pretty impactful. Plus, since we are playing a lot of plant token generators in the early game, as well as cards like Yolanda and Elenia that get more bodies for you on the board in the early game so you can push harder, seeing fronts to make those plant token numbers actually like scary against your opponent has been pretty exciting, as well as the fact that we do base this deck around one of the newer order cards that came out from set 12. We need the additional power to make all of our attacks scary. Alright, and now for the orders. So for my first order up, we have 2 copies of Mythiarch Habitat. I have discussed my obsession with this card. This card is insane. I still feel like, especially in a deck like this where superior calling is necessary, it becomes even more important. Being able to just check top 7 and call out whatever you might need in the situation has actually been a pretty big deal. I will admit that sometimes it does get awkward because there are certain pieces among these cards you don't want to call out outside from the hand. However, having access to this is actually pretty important. And finally, for the win condition of the deck, the gift that keeps on giving, the order, Blessings to the Flowering Buds. Now, Blessings to the Flowering Buds, as I explained in Claudine, gives all of your plant token units additional 10,000 power, anything with 5k or base power. Now, my approach to this deck is very early game aggro now. Last time I wasn't doing that. I was trying to like stall out and pressure with old Shieldfisher. I'm not interested in doing that anymore. I feel like with Shieldfisher, if you want to win, it's the early game that like actually decides who's going to win the game later. So therefore, being able to like make sure that you have a solid early game, and thanks to this card, is actually impactful. Being able to turn all of your triggers as well as your plant tokens into 28k beaters with boosters is incredible. They also have to deal with the fact that there is pressure to these attacks now because, for example, if you have like your Frenzied Eris or your Lena swinging at your opponent, if they hit, they'll come back to your hand. So not only do they have to block for these higher attacks, they actually have to worry about you getting more shield value into your hand because you're converting these cards into extremely insane attackers. But that is my take on Shieldfisher, guys. Let me know what you guys think about my upgraded version of the deck in below. I will actually say that this has been the most like successful variation of this deck. It doesn't feel like a bricky mess like my prior build, and I also took this one a lot more seriously compared to that. Hence the reason why there's been so many like tech choices as well as different card choices I'm still experimenting with. I actually think that some of the things I want to try in this deck in the future is probably going to be a couple of tech cards here and there. If there's anything that sticks solid to this deck, I'll let you know. But Shieldfisher is one of those decks I pick up like every once in a while, and then I test it out for a week and I let you guys know what my thoughts are on it. But with that being said, card fighters, I'm out, y'all. You guys have a great day. Thank you so much for staying tuned throughout the entirety of this video. I'll catch you later. Peace.